They built the world's first intercity highway and hid a city's heart in a single rug. They faced invaders, revolutions, and a future forged by a single voice, the people's. Then they learned to adapt, endure, and dream bigger. That's just the gist of what Iran has in store for us. So let's chase those echoes through this country's past and present. Technically, the origins of Iran date back around 2000 BCE, when a group of people called the Aryans moved down from Central Asia into a huge, high plateau. But the real story starts in 559 BCE, when we meet the man, the myth, the legend, Cyrus the Great. He started the Achaemenid Empire, which was basically the world's first true superpower. And I'm not just exaggerating. At its peak, this one government ruled over nearly half of all the humans alive on Earth. But what made them a superpower was how they ran the show. Instead of forcing everyone to be exactly like them, Cyrus was a pioneer for human rights. He let people keep their own religions and languages, which was a wild concept at the time. And to keep this giant machine running, they built the Royal Road, an ancient version of an interstate highway, and even started one of the world's first postal systems so they could send messages from one end of the empire to the other. So you could say Cyrus was the ultimate Shahanshah, or the King of Kings. But of course, every big empire eventually hits a low point, and for the Persians, that was Alexander the Great. In 330 BCE, he swept in, burned their capital city of Persepolis to the ground, and ended that thriving empire. And for the next few centuries, the land was like a giant game of tug-of-war between the Greeks and other local groups like the Parthians and Sassanids. During that time, most people followed Zoroastrianism, an ancient religion about the epic battle between good and evil. Then everything shifted again in 642 CE when Arab armies arrived and brought Islam to Persia. The old ways started to fade, and for a few hundred years, Iran became a revolving door for famous conquerors like the Seljuk Turks and even the Mongols led by Genghis Khan. After that, Iran faced a messy era where different tribes fought for control. Then a fierce leader named Tamerlane swept through and shook things up, leaving behind a legacy of terror. So, by 1501, a local family called the Safavids finally took the steering wheel. They made a huge impact by making Shiite Islam the official religion and turning Iran back into a global powerhouse. In fact, they were so strong that they kept their rivals, the Ottomans, busy in the east, which actually stopped those empires from moving further into Europe. But by the 1800s, the superpower days were fading, and a group called the Qajars took over a much weaker Iran. Because Iran sits right between Europe and Asia, big powers like Russia and Britain started treating the country like a giant chessboard. They wanted to use Iran to block each other from getting more power. This competition was called the Great Game, and it got even more intense once they realised there was a literal ocean of oil sitting under the sand. So what did the locals do? Well, the Iranian people could see their leaders were letting foreign countries take over, and they eventually had enough. That's why in 1906, they rose up in a massive revolution, not to get rid of the king yet, but to demand a parliament so the people finally had a voice. However, between the world wars and constant meddling from outside, the new government struggled to stay on its feet. That's when an army officer named Reza Khan stepped into the spotlight in 1921 by heading a coup d'etat. He eventually became the new Shah and started the Pahlavi dynasty with one goal: to bring Iran into the modern world. To achieve that, he was building massive railroads and schools, and he even officially changed the name from Persia to Iran in 1935 to show the world it was a brand new era. But the drama didn't stop there. During World War II, the big global powers forced Reza Khan to step down because they didn't trust him, and his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, took the throne. Then, by the 1950s, the country was at a breaking point over who should own that valuable oil. A popular leader named Mohammad Mossadegh tried to take the oil back from the British so the money would stay in Iran, but the CIA and British intelligence stepped in with a secret plan to kick him out and keep the young Shah in power. With the West backing him, the Shah launched the White Revolution in the 60s, giving women the right to vote and turning the capital, Tehran, into a glitzy city that looked like it belonged in Europe or America. To an outsider in the 70s, Iran looked like it was thriving, but if you looked closer, a storm was brewing. Because while the cities were full of jet-setters and wealth, many people in the countryside felt left behind and angry that their traditional religious values were being ignored. They felt the Shah had become a puppet for the West. So, a religious leader named Ayatollah Khomeini became the voice for all that anger. And in 1979, the whole country reached a boiling point. The Shah was forced to flee, the thousands of years-old monarchy was scrapped for good, and the Islamic Republic was born. Since then, the last 40 years have been a roller coaster. From a brutal 8-year war with Iraq to the constant tense standoff with the US we see in the news today. Now, when you think of the landscape of the Middle East, you might picture endless sand dunes, but Iran is a total curveball. It's the 18th largest country in the world, covering over 1.648 million square kilometres, which is about 636,000 square miles. So if you were to take a road trip from the northwest tip near Azerbaijan down to the southeast corner in Baluchistan, you would cover about 2,333 kilometres, or roughly 1,450 miles. Along the way, you would realise that Iran is actually one of the most mountainous places on Earth. These mountains aren't just pretty scenery, they have literally dictated how Iranians have lived for thousands of years by acting as giant walls that separated major cities and agricultural basins. The backbone of the country is the Zagros Mountains. This range runs from the northwest all the way to the southeast like a series of parallel ridges. Many of these peaks soar above 3,000 metres, or about 10,000 feet. And in the south-central area, 5 peaks even top the 4,000 metre mark, which is over 13,000 feet. As you head further southeast, the range starts to dip, eventually hitting the Persian Gulf in dramatic rocky cliffs. This is also where the country hides its massive oil fields, tucked right into the foothills. Up in the north, you have the Alborz Mountains, which curve along the southern shore of the Caspian Sea. This range is narrow but incredibly high. In fact, it is home to Mount Damavand, a sleeping volcano that reaches 5,609 metres, or 18,402 feet. That makes it the highest point in all of Eurasia, west of the Hindu Kush. Right at the foot of these mountains sits the capital city, Tehran, which uses the range as a stunning snow-capped backdrop. Once you climb over these mountain rims, you drop into the central plateau. The eastern side of this area is where things get really intense, because it is home to 2 of the hottest, driest deserts on the planet, the Dasht-e-Kavir and the Dasht-e-Lut. These places are so harsh they are almost entirely uninhabited, save for a few oases shaded by date palms. Now, if you are looking for flat ground, Iran only has 2 real lowland areas. In the southwest, there is the Khuzestan Plain, which is a flat, marshy extension of Mesopotamia that stretches about 160 kilometres, or 100 miles wide. Then you have the Caspian Sea coastal plain in the north. Unlike the rest of arid Iran, this northern strip is lush, humid, and gets plenty of rain. And here's the thing, Iran doesn't have much water. There are no major river systems here. The only navigable river is the Karun, and most of the other rivers are seasonal, fueled by melting snow in the spring that eventually dries up in the summer heat. You will find some permanent salt lakes though, like Lake Urumiyeh in the northwest, which is so salty that fish can't even live in it. So, now that you have an idea of the kind of land we're dealing with here, are you ready to see how the people actually survive and thrive in this rugged environment? Yeah, on paper, the Iranian government looks like it's pulling off a magic trick, because despite years of heavy sanctions, they're set to export about $114 billion in goods this year, with oil production hitting its highest level since 2018. On top of that, the expected nominal GDP for 2025 is set to hit around $357 billion. And honestly, if you just saw those charts, you'd think the economy was doing great. But for a normal person in Tehran, the reality is anything but great. While the government gets its oil money, the national currency, which is the rial, has basically collapsed. Back in 1979, $1 cost 70 reals. Today, it's over 42,000 reals. And just in 2024, the currency lost half its value, which basically deleted the life savings of the middle class overnight. And here's the reality. For most families, the economy is the price of dinner. Food prices have jumped by 66% recently, and basics like bread have doubled in price. This has created a massive gap between the rich and the poor. Right now, about 40 million people are living below the poverty line. Which begs the question, how does a country with so much money for oil have such a high poverty rate? Well, it really comes down to a choice. The government has prioritised spending billions on regional military groups and missile programs instead of prioritising the people's critical needs. And things got even tougher this past June after a series of military strikes from the US and Israel hit nuclear and energy sites. Then, in September 2025, the UN snapback sanctions kicked in, bringing back a wave of international penalties. So, right now, the mood in the country is a mix of shock and survival. People are exhausted just trying to afford food, and the government is leaning heavily on China, who buys about a third of their exports just to keep things moving. It's essentially a race between a government trying to keep its power and a population that is quite literally fighting for its next meal. But enough about the headlines, because if we want to have a deeper understanding of Iran, we have to look into its day-to-day. It's helpful to think of the culture as a mix of two different worlds. You've got the ancient Persian side that's over 3,000 years old, and the Islamic side that arrived later in the 7th century. Together they create an atmosphere you won't find anywhere else. For example, every year during the spring equinox, Iranians throw a massive party called Nowruz, the Persian New Year. It's been celebrated for thousands of years and is all about a fresh start. Families set up a special table called a haft scene with 7 symbolic items that start with the letter S in their language. You'll see apples for beauty and garlic for health. It's basically a 2-week festival that ends with a giant national picnic in the countryside to shoo away any bad luck for the year. But there's also a more serious emotional side to the Iranian spirit that comes from their history. They have this deep respect for heroes who stood up against injustice, specifically a leader named Imam Hussein, who was killed in a famous battle way back in 680 CE. This story is so important that it shapes how many Iranians see the world. So, every year, during a time called Ashura, you'll see massive parades, and even street plays where people act out the battle with incredible passion. Then, when they aren't celebrating or remembering the past, Iranians are busy making some of the coolest stuff on the planet. You've definitely heard of Persian carpets, right? Well, in Iran, a carpet is basically a biography of a city. You can look at the patterns and tell exactly where it was made, whether it's the flowery designs from Isfahan or the bright, bold colours from Tabriz. That artistic flair even goes up into the clouds with their buildings. You can visit the ancient, ghostly ruins of Persepolis, or see mosques in Isfahan covered in stunning blue tiles that look like the sky. Even the famous Azadi Tower in Tehran is a mashup, using ancient shapes from thousands of years ago mixed with modern architecture. Now, we can't talk about Iran without talking about the food. Their food isn't hot, spicy, it's more about subtle flavours. They use things like rosewater, walnuts and saffron, which is actually the most expensive spice in the world. Their main dish is rice, but it's not just plain white rice. It's fluffy, light and usually has a crunchy golden crust at the bottom called tadig. Trust me, people will actually fight over that crunchy part. Whether it's a slow-cooked stew or a juicy lamb kebab, everything is served with fresh herbs and yogurt. It's a flavour style that's been perfected over thousands of years. Now, the tale of Iran isn't finished. It's still ongoing, evolving in the people, places and pulses of every day you meet along the way. So, if there's one thing you want to see in Iran's future, what would it be? Sound off in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.